So this is the last video on the New Deal, and this one looks at the significance of the New Deal and the long-term impact it had on American politics. So it's important to note, looking back, that the New Deal did not end the Great Depression. By the end of the decade in 1940, unemployment was still 15%. And so this was, I guess, a pragmatic solution to the Great Depression, and there were lots of great aspects and successful aspects of the New Deal. But it ultimately didn't bring America all the way out of that Great Depression. It was actually World War II that did that. So some successes of the New Deal: it restored confidence to the American people. After that early period of panic and the feeling like the government had abandoned them. It employed millions of people. There was a lot of valuable construction and infrastructure that was undertaken with the long-term aim of improving the effectiveness of America in terms of its energy and its natural resources. And the banking system and capitalism was both rescued and reformed, to make sure that there was no Great Depression that could happen again in the United States. But there's also some shortcomings of the New Deal. So yeah, in 1937, that Roosevelt recession hit, which showed that the Great Depression and the economy wasn't on the continual positive spiral. Okay, there was another big dip in 1937. Unemployment remained relatively steady, peaking in 1933 at 25%. At its worst, and I guess gradually making its way down to 15%, which is still a lot. The jobs that were created were only short term on certain projects, and then that work would eventually come to an end, and these workers would have to find a new project. And the New Deal was very, very costly. We've talked about this a few times, the government having to spend massive amounts of money to hopefully make that money back. But here's just how costly it was. So the total cost of the New Deal was $4.6 trillion. And if you look at all this list of expenditures, it was actually more than all of these things combined. So among these things is the Marshall Plan, which was the post-World War II aid package given to Europe in the wake of the Second World War. There was the Louisiana Purchase, the race to the moon, the space race, the savings and loan crisis, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the invasion of Iraq and NASA, and basically all of that combined only equals 3.9 trillion, and the total cost of the New Deal was 4.6 trillion. So that's a massive amount of money that FDR and the government had to spend, especially in the short term, to, I guess, to not having the ultimate impact that they wanted to. And we've said that it wasn't until World War II that America experienced a full recovery from the Great Depression. So in 1937, there was that Roosevelt recession where there was a real decline in the success of the New Deal. The court packing scandal made the Democratic Party a lot more divided, and it gave FDR, gave him a lot more opponents, and people lost a little bit of confidence in him. But also the decline of the New Deal, in the late 1930s was because the world was heading towards another world war, and America became increasingly focused on foreign affairs rather than its own internal domestic affairs. But some long-term impacts that the New Deal had on America was the physical and the environmental rehabilitation of the country. So they attacked soil erosion by planting lots of trees, building dams and more trees to prevent floods, reclaiming the grasslands of the Great Plains, creating national parks and conservation parks to protect the wilderness, developing new energy resources, and creating lots of projects to help modernize certain parts of the country. And so there's some environmental initiatives that have rehabilitated the country. There's actually human rehabilitation as well, restoring confidence to the American people, having a lot of progress in the area of health and welfare and security, as well as the protection and education of American citizens. Social security was a huge development in the American way of life, but also providing public health care and public housing to a certain extent, and also giving people new skills in the areas of agriculture and labour. In terms of its impact on the government, under the New Deal, the power of the federal government increased dramatically and went way beyond the regulatory role that it always had. Many people felt threatened by this, and they felt that it was a step, towards a dictatorship, and it was unconstitutional. The government from that point on took a lot bigger role and responsibility for the welfare of its citizens. The government now had the responsibility to make sure that the economy ran smoothly and efficiently, and so they'd learnt that lesson that the laissez-faire approach to economics had its risks and had its dangers that lurked beneath the surface, and so the government had to now have a little bit more of an input and I guess a regulatory role on the economy. And I guess in terms of taxation and other things, the government had more power to put certain restrictions on the American people. The New Deal greatly expanded the government's role in areas of social and economic life that it had not been involved with previously, and the relationship between the government and citizens changed with the creation of a lot of those New Deal agencies. Many states had their own version of the New Deal, and they had, I guess, different ways and strategies which they could implement some of those programs in their own ways. The New Deal programs, I guess, a lot of them fizzled out towards World War II, but some of them, especially the ones with the aim of reforming them, such as the Social Security Act and the National Labour Relations Act, had really long-term benefits for working people, and so that was a huge impact that it had as well. Throughout the New Deal, the American government managed to maintain a democratic system. In a world in the 1930s that was heading towards totalitarianism with Nazi Germany, for example, the government managed to increase the scope of its power while still being democratic. But on the flip side of that, the government needed to be strong and decisive and powerful and confident to make sure that the relief, recovery and reform programs of the New Deal would actually work. But they also increased lots of moderate legislation to help appease some of those radical opponents, such as Huey Long as well. So as I said at the start of this video, it wasn't until World War II that America truly lifted itself out of the Great Depression. The New Deal began to fall apart in the late 1930s with the Roosevelt recession, and then Roosevelt started to, I guess, transition into more of a war leader rather than an economic saviour. The country braced for the worst when World War II hit, and they feared another cycle of depression. And initially that was the case, and it looked like there was going to be another major recession in the economy. But there were lots of benefits as well, such as the absence of soldiers created lots of short-term employment, and ultimately it was America's resources that were a deciding factor in World War II, and lots of countries needed what America had. And so once again, America became a shoulder to lean on for its European neighbours, and it was this desperate need for America's manufacturing power and production power and goods that led to America and their economy becoming once again a world superpower.